Hello, students. This is going to be the video recording for you to cover the Thursday lesson of the 13th of March. And we left off here in chapter 3.3, discussing rewilding, which had this idea of regenerating natural processes in disturbed areas. So you already wrote a lot about that. And we also said that this had many different kind of methods to regenerate or rewild natural processes, or yeah, regenerate natural processes. So letting it regenerate without human intervention, just leaving it alone, and allowing natural succession to do everything. Or we can do certain things to help this move along faster by removing species, restoring habitats more actively, and reintroducing species. These last three requires, of course, that we know what we're doing so we don't make it worse. Um, and one famous example that we end up talking about was this reintroduction of wolves in the Yellowstone National Park. And those wolves have been gone for many years. And so this loss of an apex predator in the system, of course, had ecological effects. And one of them was the increase in herbivores, which also changed their behavior now that there was no predators around. And one of the impacts that had was on the erosion of riverbanks, because erosion is this removal of soil mass, and since there were so the deer moved close to these rivers in the open, and they grazed away a lot of the plant life that were living close to the water, and the roots of those plants would normally keep the soil in place, so there was no erosion. But now that the herbivores are here in greater numbers and in more intensely graze these areas, these roots disappeared and erosion of the banks increased. Now that when the wolves were reintroduced, they of course started hunting these deer, and they no longer grazed so intensely on these banks, and the roots came back, and whoopity doo dah, erosion protection. So that's really cool. These kind of cascade effects due to natural processes. So neat, neat, neat. But let's continue. Boom. The next thing we're going to cover in chapter 3.3 is something called the Convention of Biological Diversity, or CBD. So this is a treaty in the UN that is addressing conservation, both in species-based strategies and habitat-based strategies. Now, the objective of this convention is to develop national strategies for the conservation and sustainable use of biological diversity. So both how to conserve diversity and also how we in the future and now should use biodiversity. So the resources that we get from biological diversity so we should develop strategies to use those sustainably so we don't experience loss of biodiversity and these resources in the future. And one area, of course, that is very difficult to regulate is international waters. So the tragedy of the commons, of course, is something we talked about with international fishing. And the idea is that this UN treaty would help us to protect areas outside of national jurisdiction, so international water protected by the UN. That's cool. And it also includes what is called the Nagoya Protocol, which is how we use and share genetic resources. I'm not really sure what that one means, but let's continue. So of course the whole point of doing this is to kind of help us maintain a planet that where we can live. So as we've said, we talked about this planetary boundaries concept as a way of assessing, as an indicator for humanity living sustainably. And here we have the biosphere integrity, which is of course what we're talking about here. So this is one of those 1, 2, 3, 4, 9 different planetary boundaries that have been assessed, and we know that we're living in an age where we have a lot of loss of biodiversity, which has been considered as a threat to human societies into the future. So if we do both restoration and regeneration of degraded natural systems, and at the same time conserving the habitats and species that we have, we can reverse this decline. So not only halt it, but also reverse it. So we can increase biodiversity, and thereby ensuring that the planet and the biosphere will allow human societies to prosper. And these measures that we do to regenerate and restore and conserve and protect habitats and species can be done at the individual, collective, national, and international level. And of course, we've talked a little bit about these together, but on the individual level, we haven't talked too much. But of course, you as an individual can support various companies and NGOs that do biodiversity, but you can also do things to mitigate your own impacts on biodiversity by, for example, restraining what kind of activities that you do and choosing your diet, for example. I will get back or talk more about that later. And this is where we get this connection back to chapter 1.1, which is why I will continue that after we've now finished 3.3. We'll come back to that chapter. So how we get successful conservation, that depends on many factors. Of course, if we're going to do conservation, we need to have appropriate legislation. We need to have education about the importance of conservation, how to do conservation effectively in this area. And when we're making a protected habitat, we need to have the support of people in the area. So we need to increase local awareness, increase empathy for the species or the habitat that we're trying to protect, and how, for example, that protected area may have benefits for the local community. So making these benefits stand out will be very important. And doing habitat conservation requires a lot of funding, so this funding will be important as well. And this funding will also help us to do research, which would help us identify which species and areas are most valuable for habitat protection, and doing follow-up studies to see how biodiversity is changing and which kind of measures we've taken and have been most successful. So all these efforts cost time and money for us, and there's also different reasons for choosing which areas to protect, and those relate to our environmental perspective. So that's where I'm just going to bring them up now. They're going to be a little bit out of context for you, but when we go back to chapter 1.1, which is immediately after this, hopefully they will make a bit more sense. So which approaches we choose to get appropriate legislation, education, community support, and funding and research and so on depends on our environmental perspective. So an environmental perspective is basically how we see humans and nature come together and how we solve environmental problems. There's one type of perspective called ecocentrists, and I will explain what that means later in the video. But these people tend to value nature for itself, and they will approach conservation for this intrinsic value. And the strategies that will be favored by ecocentrists would potentially be low intervention in situ measures, so protected areas, where human impacts are reduced, and we have a maybe more passive management style. And then there are two other types of environmental value or perspectives called technocentrism and anthropocentrism. Those are put humans as the primary part of nature, and that nature is valuable because it provides us with values. So the reasons why an ecocentrist or sorry, a technocentrist or an anthropocentrist will do conservation would be for the societal values and the economic values. So what do you call it? The ecosystem services that nature will provide. And they will be more keen on doing conservation involving, for example, zoos, genobanks, and ecotourism. So these will be maybe more interesting for them. So that's the end actually of 3.3. And since we talked about these environmental perspectives, those are presented in chapter 1.1, I thought we should go back and look at those. Now, of course, I'm talking probably fast for you, and you don't need to write all these things down, but of course, I will not be doing this for the whole 80 minutes, but rather maybe 40, so you can pause this video and take notes when you need to. Okay, but chapter 3.3 is done. Let's go to chapter 1 then, or 1.1, which is called Perspectives. So perspective. So this basically this chapter is a lot about humans and our societies and ethics and philosophy and so on. It's really fun. So I need to do some definitions first. So a perspective is how a particular person views a situation and how they understand it. So this shows the perspective of the different people who are in the same situation. This person on the stranded island sees a boat, and this person that has been floating around in this boat instead is happy to see land. So they view this situation completely differently. Now, the perspectives that we all have include a lot of different assumptions, values, and beliefs. And these perspectives are kind of informed by and justified by the norms that we have, our scientific understanding, the laws that govern our society or in specific society, the religion that you may have yourself or be that is kind of persistent in your community, local and global events, your life experience, etc., etc. And these perspectives gives then rise to different positions that will take on environmental and social issues, and they will influence your choices and actions. Now, the values that make up the perspective, of course, these values are defined as qualities or principles that people assign worth and importance. So, for example, justice may be important, kindness or loyalty. So these are lists of different types of values that you may or may not have. So values are, of course, individual, but we share those, of course, with people around us. And which values you have will be shaped by your community. And these values, they will affect how we prioritize, or sorry, will affect your judgments, perspectives, and choices. And that's weird animation, but it worked, hopefully. Now, the values that you have can be seen in the types of actions that you do and types of communication that you do. So basically, I can understand the values of an individual by looking at what they do and what they say with your community. But we can also see values can also be held by organizations and companies, and they can be seen through the types of advertisement they do, the media strategies that they have, for example, which type of posters and maybe signs and yada yada, and how they interact with in social media, the policies that they have, and the actions that they do. So kind of similar, but slightly different. So in perspectives are both individual perspectives, but or sorry, values are both individual, but they can also be held by organizations and companies. And here's something that will connect to your IA in ESS. So different values or people having different values and different perspectives can lead to tensions between individuals and organizations. And your EIA will be studying some environmental issue. And part of basically your background, I would say, is looking at the different tensions that exist in how to address this environmental issue. So it's a little bit kind of, you're doing this research project, you write a report about it, but then you're also expected to give this little knowledge tidbit in your IA. I think it's 4 marks out of your total 30, so it's absolutely important. So this will be important for you to keep in mind when you do your IA. We'll talk more about this later, but if you want to investigate someone's perspective, this can actually be an IA doing some kind of value survey. But we'll talk more about that later when we get closer to the IAs actually. So I'll skip a little bit more of that, but basically saying that we can do value surveys to investigate someone's perspectives and values and so on. So we can continue. Worldviews are also important in understanding people's perspective, and these are defined as the lenses shared by groups of people through which they perceive, make sense of, and act in their environment. So worldviews are, of course, can be many. You can be an atheist, you can be a humanist, you can be a theist, a nihilist, and so on. These are just examples of different types of worldviews. And these worldviews will shape your values and your perspectives. And they do that via the culture that you live in, the philosophies that are ingrained in that society, the ideologies, the religions and politics. So the worldview that you will develop will depend on the community that you live in. Now, what I do see a lot of exam questions in the previous syllabus were about these environmental value systems. So a lot of the high mark questions often ask you to contrast how people with different environmental value systems will look at an environmental issue. So environmental value system basically is a model to show how our specific perspective is shaped and which types of outputs it will have. So the inputs, so this can be seen then as a systems model that you may remember from chapter 1.2. So there are inputs into a perspective, and the perspective has outputs. So this is very similar to stuff we've said before when we talked about perspectives, but that the inputs that shape an individual's perspective can be, for example, education. So hopefully this ESS education will somehow impact your environmental value system. We will find out at the end of the course, I guess, or you will find out at the end of the course. Experiences that you've had, the culture that you engage with, and the media that you consume. And these inputs shape your perspective, and that leads to different outputs. So the outputs of your in the environmental value system will be the decisions you make, the actions, your choices, and evaluations of different situations. And your judgments, maybe. And here we see something very similar to that. Okay, these environmental perspectives then. So which type of perspective in this model, the thing in the middle here, can be broadly categorized into these three: technocentrist, ecocentrist, and anthropocentrist. These are not completely exclusive categories. People usually have a complex range of positions that change over time and context. So basically, in some situations, you may be more technocentric, and another you may be more ecocentric, or others you may be more anthropocentric. And throughout your life, you will change between these, so on. But this is an imperfect model, but it is useful. I will argue that the big divide is between ecocentric on one side and anthropocentric on the other, and that technocentrism is a part of anthropocentric. But let's maybe you agree with me, but that's not what the syllabus says. But so let's see. We'll cover these now in one by one, and this is where we kind of connect back to 3.3, where we talked about how ecocentrists, anthropocentrists, and technocentrists would perhaps want to do conservation for different reasons and in different ways. Okay, so here we can try to define ecocentrism. So in this model over here, you see lots of different kind of organisms, and humans are within this little circle of life. So basically, ecocentrists puts basically nature as a whole as the center of existence, and humans are part of this, not the pinnacle of this or the top of all of nature. So nature itself has some kind of importance and intrinsic value. And for an ecocentrist, if human societies are going to prosper, that requires us to have functioning ecosystems. So without a nature imbalance, so to say, there will be no human flourishment. So ecocentrism may involve these kind of things, like putting high value on biorights, so the intrinsic value of other organisms, that they have values in and of themselves that are not related to the values that they have for humans. And humans, being that human activities lead to many problems, argue that to solve these problems, humans would have to restrain ourselves. For example, choosing to be vegan for environmental reasons, or consuming less or traveling less, changing your lifestyle to mitigate the problems that your lifestyle causes. So it's about kind of these kind of measures that are taken by ecocentrists. Ecocentrists usually often also criticize economic growth as a political goal. So they argue that economic growth is linked to an increased use of natural resources, which destroys habitats, leads to pollution, and so on. And the use of these natural resources will, on the other, at the end of their life cycle basically lead to loss of pollution that harm biodiversity. And the way basically, or one important way that we spread, so it's about kind of individual actions are very important here. So to change our collective impact on nature, we have to spread information. So education about problems and how we can mitigate them is an important tool in ecocentrism, how to address environmental issues. So if more people know the problems that their lifestyles cause, they will then choose to do less of those harmful actions. And you should know about an extreme form of ecocentrism, which is called deep green ecology. So they basically maybe check all these marks. So the most extreme case of a deep green ecologist would be someone choosing to live off grid or something like that. Greta Thunberg, for example, would probably count as an ecocentrist. Anthropocentrism, on the other hand, means human-centered. So basically, it could imply that nature only has a value according to its use to humans, or at least that humans have the most central part of nature, and that human societies have a higher value than natural systems. And it's there's a lot of different concepts of like ethics and philosophy in anthropocentrism, which will potentially define anthropocentrism in different ways. So it's a bit of a difficult term, but hopefully we get some kind of sense of what it could mean. Anthropocentrists acknowledge that environmental issues are caused by human activities, and so they understand that there needs to be some kind of changes, and there is still value to nature that needs to be protected. And so these solutions to environmental issues are in anthropocentrism usually done by advocating changes to regulation in economic incentives. So environmental regulation is very important. So for example, carbon taxes or setting standards on vehicles for emissions and so on, and the types of economic incentives for subsidies and taxes and fines and so on. These are ways to change the market into being more market and individuals to make more appropriate choices. So instead of basically as an ecocentrist, the idea is that these choices would come from a self-choice, basically self-restraint. Here it's about the economic incentives forcing people to, or altering people's behaviors. But which kind of regulations and incentives that are employed are balanced strongly by how they impact humans. So regulations that would be very beneficial for nature wouldn't be put in place if it has a disproportionately strong negative impact for human societies. So for example, banning, for example, fisheries in the Baltic. So you can regulate that by banning fishery for 5 years, but that will impact fishermen and people wanting to eat fish and using these resources for something. So it may not be used for that reason. Technocentrism is an unwavering faith in human progress, and then humans are the control or dominate nature, and we can then basically use our ingenuity to solve all kinds of problems that will develop. Of course, they still also acknowledge environmental issues as problems, just like anthropocentrists. And the way we tackle these problems is not to limit the activities of humans that cause these problems, but to improve technology so that we can still continue to do the same things. So here, I don't know, this figure I found, or it's very difficult to find good pictures of this, but there are some things here that are important at least. So adding building technologies that would, for example, remove carbon from fossil fuel burning, that would be a technique or a technocentric kind of approach to solving climate change. Improving nuclear power plants and using these high technological solutions to solve energy security and at the same time climate problems is also a technocentric kind of idea. Or it could be adding particles to the atmosphere that reflect sunlight, so we also get less warming from that. That would also be a technocentric approach. So the way that we solve these, or the instead of education or legislation here, we instead want to put a lot of effort into research and innovation to find new ways then basically of solving problems. And according to technocentrists, or at least some of them, we can continue to have unlimited economic growth. And an extreme form of technocentrism is called cornucopian. Usually they ask people to, or in many exam questions I've seen, you basically contrast a cornucopian view and an ecocentrist view. And so for a the end goal, I would say, for technocentrism is to decouple our economies. That would mean that increase in GDP would not lead to increases in pollution, carbon dioxide, or other types of gases or other types of pollutants, nor material use. So basically, materials that we get into our economic systems can be recycled and reused and so on. So that would be kind of the way that unlimited economic growth can be achieved. And if you want, we can talk more about decoupling or the material footprints and so on at some point. Here we have a way to compare them to each other from that I found online, which is pretty good. You can get some key points there: the ecocentrism, nature with inherent value. We should do minimum disturbance. Ecology and nature are central to humanity. Self-importance to train, so less materialism and so on. Anthropocentrism, taxes, legislation, and so on. And we can manage economic growth, technology, and technocentrism, and so on. In the other book, that you don't have, there's a nice table that I've copied and put here, where you can compare different types of perspectives or parts of these different environmental perspectives. And you see that I also misspell some stuff, but the focus of ecocentrism is this ecosystem health, whereas anthropocentrism, it's human needs, desires, and well-beings, and technocentrism is technology and so on. Here, look, ant. It's supposed to be and, of course. Environmental problems are resolved from disruption of ecological balance caused by human actions, can be mitigated, can solve through technological innovation. So I hope that you can get some understanding of the differences between these approaches or different environmental value systems. And you may, of course, realize that maybe some kind of balanced approach, that maybe you find value in each of these kind of ways to solve environmental issues. And that for me, that seems very fair, that all of these aspects have a role in solving environmental issues. Or maybe the most effective way is that all of these things are contributing, legislating and developing new technologies, but at the same time changing our individual behaviors as well. It's often argued in climate change, for example. Okay, now our perspectives and beliefs change over time in all societies. These can be influenced by the government and governmental and non-governmental organizations through campaigns or social or demographic change. So one example is that you can see how these change that the syllabus brings up. For example, such as smoking. So there's a falling rate of smoking since the 1960s. For example, in the US here, it's fallen by a factor of 3. So has the trend to eat meat has increased in over the same time in many Western countries, but have now reached a plateau, and in some years it's actually decreasing. And the values that we have as a change in our societies due to economic development also changes our perspectives. So that's neat. And finally, we're going to talk about the environmental movement. But I wonder, 36 minutes. I think I will stop there actually, and we will do that in class instead next week, or in another video if there's a conflict again with one of these meetings. So I'll stop here, and we can take this environmental movement later. If you have any questions or anything that I covered too fast that you want to talk about again, please email me or bring it up in class. And I hope you have a pleasant day otherwise. Ciao, ciao.